I will remember my entire life the way in which Chuck treated me. That was not a thrilling refrain in an action-packed Western, but rather an equation written in Chuck Connor's old, rough notebook. This was a figure in America whom everyone knew to be the perfect father figure. But this average Joe hero was secretly writing down hurts that took a lifetime to heal. Among those whose names were never brought up were former actors, some of whom were co-actors, while others were people with whom Connors had considered a kind of familiarity, people with whom he had spent many months, even years, literally on a television series, only to discover that they were more interested in laughing at him on a network television show, with millions of people viewing, than in allowing him to share professional success with them. One male actor, Connor's on-screen son for 5 seasons, took a sudden leave because a better offer came along. What they did was disappointing to Connors, but it also left him with a deep resentment. In one entry he wrote, "There are people whom even if I lived 10 times over, I would never shake hands with again." The question that lingered was very simple: who they were and whether any of them ever got punished. Number 1. Kirk Douglas. The person Connors referred to as the most narrow-minded individual he had ever met was actor Kirk Douglas. In the middle 1960s, while he was one of the brightest lights on American television with the Rifleman series, he had a major film offer. This would start the diminutive actor on a path to a possibly great tumult. Connors' film offer came with the chance to star in the television series Ben Casey playing the title role, Dr. Benjamin Casey. The project was Shadow Valley. It was a Western that was slated by Warner Brothers in 1965. The storyline was about a crew of cowboys who had no choice but to work together with the Native Americans in order to evade the dangerous gang of outlaw. That which highlighted was the actors who were selected for this project. They were Kirk Douglas and Chuck Connors. Douglas was already a towering presence in Hollywood following Spartacus and Paths of Glory. Far from being widely known is his penchant for meddling with scripts, casting, and even the backstories of actors. In the first casting session conducted at the Burbank Studios, director Alan Wexler brought out Walter Raines, an African-American thespian, for the role of Elijah, who was calm and clever, with the skills of a tracker to complement the character of Connors. All that changed after reading the script with Connors. According to an anonymous crew member, Douglas walked into the office of the director and demanded that the actor playing Elijah be replaced by someone more familiar with what the crowd expected. There was no need for an explanation. Moreover, the incidents involving Douglas were not over. When he observed that Raines was seated alongside the lead actor, Connors, during lunch hours, he supposedly told his assistant that he disliked the lead actors sharing equal time on screen with a performer like that, as it did not fit the frame. While the quoted dialogue had not reached the news headlines, the news had spread like fire through the team. Soon, the producers were pressuring Wexler to change the supporting cast as per the Southern TV audience's requirement. Connors remained silent until the next official script meet. When asked whether he has any concerns regarding the allocation of the scenes, he closed the script and placed it on the table, and said that he has been working in television for almost a decade, and that he has never thought that he would have to make a choice between his reputation and respect for other people. That same day, Connors withdrew from a project. Shadow Valley was never produced. Walter Raines was replaced in a matter of weeks by a white actor with no reason given. In a very rare interview in 1973, Raines stated that the Hollywood of today would have no place for men like me except as servants. Douglas never commented on the affair, but his willingness to control public perceptions of those around him was later corroborated. Connor's next role was that of Branded, the story of a soldier who is kicked out of the army for his refusal to hurt innocents. It was also thought that this role was very much like Connors, who was a man who did not believe in taking orders that were unethical, no matter how dearly it may cost him. After that, Connors and Douglas were never spotted together again. In 1987, Connors was invited on a talk show to name actors he could not work with. But instead, he smiled and spoke, "I've never worked with anyone who made other people feel smaller because of how they were born." The message was obvious. He was referring to Reimer. It was a time when keeping quiet was deemed safe. But instead, Connors chose principle. It cost him some offers, but not his self-respect. Not all the conflict, though, arose out of a moral point of view. At other times, it took only a joke to ruin a relationship. Number 2, Johnny Carson. Johnny Carson made it impossible for Connors to hold his head up again. In November 1971, Connors took part in The Tonight Show at Rockefeller Plaza, which was part of NBC. It was supposed to be a high-rated episode. Connors was still a household name, his cowboy image imprinted in public culture. Carson's patter ran the usual course, casual and taunting, but Carson turned quickly to Connors' sporting background and current problems on the golf circuit. He teased, "If you shoot as straight as you used to throw a baseball, perhaps the rifleman wouldn't have fallen in the ratings." The audience chuckled, none the wiser that Connors had asked the producers not to bring up the ratings and the rough patch he'd experienced in life. Connors was motionless and silent. Carson continued. As he talked about some of the most memorable moments on his shows, he smiled mischievously and noted that Connors was being far too friendly with Johnny Crawford, his TV son. Embarrassed laughter ensued. People in Connors' profession knew what was being hinted at. For years, the tabloids had published unclear implications about Connors and Crawford that had never been true. Carson's joke transformed gossip into a public implication in front of millions of viewers. Crew members said that Connors' facial expression was non-changing, but his eyes clouded. After the show, Connors did not acknowledge the touch of Carson's hand. He went straight to the stage and did not go back to any talk show. It seems he erased Carson from his life by not attending any award ceremonies, including those he hosted. The fallout was intense. The tabloids had headlines screaming with damaging publicity to Connors at a time when such reports would ruin a career. He was pulled from a string of productions because of ambiguous reasons, due to him becoming bad publicity. Ironically, Carson and Connors had previously been friends. They golfed, they talked backstage, they accepted each other's invitations to parties, recalls Carson. It all ended over one joke. When Carson's friend Connors died in 1992, he was not at his funeral. Years later, Carson confessed he was unaware where the line was, notes American Nation. The silence that ensued lasted for decades. There was no shouting, no argument, just a distance that was never bridged. Number 3, Gregory Peck. Another name that Connors never forgave was Gregory Peck. The year 1960 was the peak period for Connors' fame. The Rifleman was one of the most viewed shows in the nation. The image of Connors portrayed respect, integrity, and modesty. Gregory Peck symbolized classical Hollywood polish, and this was buttressed by an efficient publicity machine. With the announcement of the list of the most influential television actors by Screen Actors Monthly, a high placement was expected of Connors. But he came in 7th. Gregory Peck, who appeared on television only once, came second. Rumors spread like wildfire. A later quote came from a director who said he was invited to vote by representatives of Peck with gifts and insinuations about intellectual television characters. Shortly later, Peck landed a sponsorship deal in the pharmaceutical industry that was meant for Connors. The worst part was when both actors were invited for the audition for a big war movie. Connors had seen the script and had committed to the project on paper when he was told that his schedule was changed. Later, the offer went to Peck. He took tremendous losses without being compensated. Anonymous press articles quickly portrayed Connors as unprofessional. Although they were anonymous press articles, they were clearly about Connors. The industry did not require proof. It merely required story. The industry removed Connors from projects. In 1966, at an event for the Screen Actors Guild, there was supposed to be a group photo. Connors was asked to stand alongside Peck. He had stepped back and walked away. Photo sessions had been canceled. People knew why. Peck never had a chance to respond. He didn't have to. Connors later explained what had stung the most, not the loss of money or opportunities, but the feeling of being moved aside by a man hailed as the eternal gentleman, someone who treated women like deities and everyone else like dirt. When asked about Peck years later, Connors had a simple explanation. Not everyone who wears a fine suit can be trusted. Peck didn't respond. They were never spotted together again. The conflict evolved not through an encounter, but through silence. unseen nudges, cunning moves, and silent betrayals. Even though Peck was not the last man that Connors broke trust with, he was one of the individuals who made sure that it also didn't heal. Number 4. Burt Lancaster. That man had an ego bigger than any other man that I had ever met. The film industry still remembers the silent, explosive rift which occurred in 1970 between two men that few people had any reason to believe would ever intersect. Chuck Connors was a man noted for his physical strength, his directness, and his decisiveness. Burt Lancaster was a Hollywood idol, appreciated on screen, but notorious in his personal relationships for being controlling and hard to get along with. Neither man quarreled in public nor verbally demeaned each other in interviews. After sharing one production meeting, they never spoke again. It all started when United Artists announced the project Sundown Redemption in March 1970. It is a modern Western film shot in the New Mexico setting. The film is directed by Gene Ainsworth. The screenplay is by an emerging screenwriter, Robert Castle. It has since emerged that the lead protagonist, who is an aging gunslinger tormented by memories of the war, has practically been created for Connors alone. Chuck took the job for $85,000. This is no small amount for a television star. Every arrangement seems to have fallen into place. However, soon after, the studio made an announcement that Burt Lancaster was also invited to appear as the villain, a comrade who has returned to pay off an old debt. Connors did not mind this development initially. He actually knew the actor from social functions for charitable causes, and they also had experience in playing professional sports themselves. However, there was something about this actor that was notorious. He was notorious for rewriting scripts, revisioning characters, and directing affairs even when he was only contracted to appear. Only a week after Lancaster formally joined Sundown Redemption, a new script emerged. Although this new script was an unofficial rewrite by a studio, it had actually come from Lancaster himself, written for and circulated only to the director and producers. In this new script, Connors' role had been reduced. His dialogue had lessened, his intentions obfuscated, and his finale ceased to belong to him. Instead, Lancaster's new role took over as the deep thoughts focal point of this movie. The point of no return occurred on April 6th at a production meeting that took place at the El Rey Court Hotel, located in Santa Fe. According to production assistant Dina Chavez, Connors was presented with manuscript revisions written in Lancaster's handwriting, and there was no explanation behind it. As Connors turned over the pages, he was met with silence. Page after page, scenes that had been written had been marked through in red ink. In what he thought was a battle with his past, he found it revised into a monologue to be spoken by Lancaster's character. Connors closed the script, turned his full attention on Lancaster, and asked why he was involved with the project anyway. LancasterChoices.com shrugged, looking very calm, and said the story required a different, more mature track, and his role held far more depth. Closing the discussion, Connors stood up, took the revised pages, flung the pages across the floor, and walked out. The following day, Connors withdrew from a project, including a confidentiality agreement, through his lawyer. Nonetheless, a leakage of the information happened. In one trade press, there was a reason given as to why Connors pulled out. He could no longer work with a person acting as if they were an unofficial director. This was reacted to by Lancaster, who described it as a couple of creative differences. The aftermath was steep. Connors had his schedule locked for 3 months because of some contract issues. Back in June, he had turned over a $20,000 advance and paid $8,000 in penalties for pulling out. Connors later that year was very matter-of-fact about it all, stating that he could be losing funds and roles, but that he would never find himself compromising a character for the purpose of being the setting for someone else's story. However, it resumed filming with a new title, The Bitter Track. It was a low-key release in 1972, and this movie received criticism for being preachy and emotionally flat. It was a failure on the critically acclaimed as well as commercial fronts. After that, Connors and Lancaster were neither spotted together nor recognized at any award functions. For decades, neither had any comments on the other. Yet the experience that occurred for Connors as a result of the Lancaster alienation is only the first link in the series of personal crises he faces in those days. The next one would end up cutting far deeper, since he would receive the painful blow from a person he loved. Number 5. Kamala Devi. Maybe I will never forgive her throughout my whole life. Just like what happened to Chuck Connors, when he was introduced to Kamala Devi at the set of Geronimo during the summer of 1963, it was immediately noticed that there was a big difference in Chuck. Kamala was not like the women that Chuck had dated in the past. They married in a private ceremony in the backyard of the Brentwood home owned by Connors toward the end of 1963. There was no publicity or more than a few guests present. There appeared to be harmony between them for several years, and Kamala moved away from the entertainment world and accompanied Connors to charity functions. The press called them an unlikely but gorgeous couple. Cracks developed over the years. Connors was very private, and Kamala wanted to have an open relationship. Kamala conducted interviews without his knowledge, and once commented on television that Chuck likes to have quiet evenings and cannot be disturbed. This made Connors very irritated. The biggest chasm occurred with regards to Kamala's desire for a child. Kamala got pregnant in 1966, but had a miscarriage. After the occurrence, Connors distanced himself emotionally and refused any therapy or discussion on the treatments. Kamala desired a cure. Connors wanted silence. However, the breaking point for Kamala came in 1969 when she accepted a part in a BBC series that involved shooting for 6 months in London. Connors warned her that this would be the death of her marriage. However, she went anyway. When the shoot extended, she wrote to him. According to the housekeeper, Connors burned all her letters without reading them. When Kamala came back in 1970, there were no pickup cars to take her home. The locks on their home were changed. Her things were stored in the garage. A note was left by Connors, which explained he did not restart what he closed. Divorce papers came shortly thereafter. Kamala parted ways with America and vanished from public sight. Connors never remarried and compartmentalized his private life. In later years, when he was asked about her, he inquired if she was taken care of. This marriage that had been filled with sweetness had culminated in cold emotional distance. 6. Michael Landon. He exploited my image for his own gain. In American television, 2 contrasting versions of the father figure appeared in the 1960s. Chuck Connors symbolized the hard-nosed protector. Michael Landon portrayed the sensitive, expressive father. At first, there was no competition. However, the critics and the media began constructing Landon and Connors as opposing models of males. Stories covered Landon's affability while concurrently criticizing the sternness of Connors. This offended Connors. In 1972, both men appeared at a CBS event that honored television fathers. During a panel discussion, Landon stated that children needed fathers that cried and made mistakes, but did not reach for their guns. Applause followed. Connors did not speak, but later insisted that footage of himself be withdrawn from the broadcast. In that instant, Connors severed any semblance of public connection with Landon. He and Landon never showed up at a public gathering again as a pair. Even when Connors passed away in 1992, he had a wreath inscribed with no name, which read, "For a man who does what he believes to be right." It was signed by Landon. Number 7. Johnny Crawford. He may never have realized just how much I loved him. On screen, Chuck Connors and Johnny Crawford were father and son, a role model that characterized a generation of children. Behind the scenes, the relationship was much more complicated. Connors was stern and aloof. Johnny was young, energetic, and immediately lovable. With the start of Johnny Benson, the fame of the young boy grew, but the distance of Connors from the crew increased. There have been instances of tensions at times when Connors walked off the sets without saying a word due to mistakes committed, said the crew. So, when the show concluded, Johnny assembled a photograph album for Connors and actually waited for him at the going-away party. Connors showed up late, departed early, and never signed it. They did not keep in touch. Johnny never had one negative word about Connors. "It's his style of caring," Johnny once said. When Connors died, Johnny stayed away from the funeral. However, a wreath was sent with a card that signed off with thanks for teaching me how to stand tall even when silence stings more than a slap. Their relationship finished not in anger, but in distance. Much like the majority of relationships that Connors has been in, there was only an absence of words. For Chuck Connors, the passage of time did not heal these wounds. It preserved them. Each silent hurt, each lost friendship, seared into his memory until the day he died. These were not script-written movies, but the hidden stories that took place under the glamour lights. Perhaps the most tragic fact is the question of right and wrong, and the reality that some of the greatest pains can hail from the hands in which we once most trusted our soul.